We are back with another homestead questions video. The question of today is, what are the 5 basic survival skills? Now, in terms of what we might think versus what anyone else might think, that's a difference of opinion. But since we were asked the question, these are our 5 top survival skills that we would suggest for homesteading or for just survival in the wilderness. So the first one would be building a fire. Regardless of what time of year it is, regardless of how cold you are or may not be, regardless of the temperature or the climate of where you might be, building a fire is a skill that is super important to have. Reason being, because you can't really cook much without some sort of heat or without some sort of fire source. Presumably, if you're looking at a survival skill, you are not lucky enough to be dropped in the middle of the wilderness with a stove. So building a fire is something that's very important to have, whether that's indoors or outdoors, or knowing how to make a fire from different materials. That's something that is very important. Something that I discovered actually this year, that's been part of my own kind of learning curve, has been that the typical teepee way of building a fire doesn't always have to be the case. You can actually build a fire setting up a rectangle and putting all of your fire starter in the middle, and it builds out from there. But I never knew that before, so that's something that I learned. Useful tip or trick if you didn't know that either. Tip number 2 would be finding and preserving and the whole food process. So finding food, preserving food, being able to cook food as well, hence the fire, that's important. Humans can go a certain amount of time without food, but if you're looking at an extended stay, or if you are living out in the middle of nowhere, or you're in the middle of something in the middle of the wilderness, you're going to need food at some point. So finding food is another survival skill, whether you're fishing or hunting or gardening or trapping or some sort of combination of all 4 of them. Tip number 3 would of course be finding water. We as humans can't survive without water, so that's pretty self-explanatory. Find yourself a river, a lake, a stream, some sort of fresh water source or mountain spring that you're able to get to, so that you can make sure that you have a water source and a consistent water source, because the last thing you want in the middle of the wilderness is to not know where your water is coming from. Tip number 4 would be building a shelter. Now, you can sleep out under the stars. That's usually not an issue. It's not the end of the world, but you are, if you're going to be out on a more permanent basis, you are going to need some sort of shelter or some sort of area in which you can set up a home base or a home camp. At the very least, some sort of tarp tent where you can have your belongings safe from the elements, from wind, and hopefully from animals and or other people as well. So building a shelter is something that is super important, and that is what I would say a survival skill. Tip number 5, or thing number 5, skill number 5, whatever you want to call it, is medical know-how. This is something that's not often talked about, because we kind of take it for granted a lot of the time that we're going to be okay and that we're going to always be fine. What happens if somebody cuts themselves, or worse, breaks a leg or breaks an arm, or breaks something on their body, or even just sprains it? Do you have the medical know-how to know how to take care of things, and to know how to take care of yourself and or someone else should that medical emergency arise? If you don't, I have found for myself, in terms of learning about medicine and learning about home remedies, as well as different things that you can do if you're out in the wilderness, if you break something or whatever, I have found that something that's really helpful has been bushcraft. They're a really good source, I find, for the accuracy and for different ideas with different materials that you have. The idea, of course, is that you want to be as prepared as possible should something happen. So if you have those 5 survival skills and you know that those 5 things are the most important things for you to have down pat and be able to know, then I think you're pretty much set. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next Homestead Questions.